Okay, so we will begin the webinar right now.
Hola, ¿qué tal? Muy buenos días. Mi nombre es Elsa Yáñez, soy presidente de BOMA México y les doy la más cordial bienvenida a este webinar hecho en conjunto con BOMA International. El día de hoy tenemos un panel de lujo, pero antes que esto me gustaría comentarles acerca de la Asociación Mexicana del Edificio Inteligente y Sustentable, AC, BOMA México. Dentro de IMEI nosotros integramos el conocimiento, la innovación y la tecnología para desarrollar edificaciones inteligentes y sustentables en México. Esto lo hacemos a través de la membresía, a través de impartir un diplomado que lleva más de 25 años en el gusto del público, asimismo como talleres y webinars, y el premio IMEI BOMA, que este año premió a la excelencia en la edificación en México. Como capítulo de BOMA en México, nosotros promovemos las mejores prácticas en el desarrollo inmobiliario a través de cursos de capacitación, como es el estándar de medición de oficinas de BOMA, certificaciones ambientales para edificaciones existentes, como puede ser BOMA 360 y BOMA Best, y la relación que guarda nuestro premio IMEI BOMA con el premio Toby Awards es que el finalista o los ganadores más bien del premio IMEI BOMA pueden participar en este premio que es muy reconocido a nivel mundial y que es de Outstanding Building of the Year. Nuestros asociados 2021 están dentro de toda la gama de la cadena de valor de la industria inmobiliaria, desde los fabricantes hasta los distribuidores, los integradores, prestadores de servicios y operadores, brokers, parte de desarrolladores de negocios y etcétera del sector inmobiliario. Como las alianzas estratégicas son muy importantes para nosotros, quiero comentarles que nosotros nos mantenemos en constante comunicación con otras asociaciones de la industria de las instalaciones para las ciudades, la infraestructura y las edificaciones. Esto pueden ser asociaciones nacionales o también pueden ser capítulos extranjeros de asociaciones en México. Por el otro lado, con el sector inmobiliario también tenemos alianza con asociaciones tan importantes con AMEFIBRA, AMPIP, el ICEI y el World Resource Institute México. Quiero llamar su atención brevemente a las 5 tendencias que están redefiniendo el sector inmobiliario y sus tecnologías asociadas, que es un tema que estamos tratando en estos 30 años de vida de IMEI BOMA México. Estos son, la número 1 sería redefinir el propósito de la edificación, para qué queremos volver a las oficinas. El número 2 sería la calidad ambiental interior, y es un tema muy relacionado con lo que estamos viviendo actualmente. La número 3 sería la inteligencia artificial, que va a ser la habilitadora de las otras 4 tendencias. El wellness o bienestar, que es muy importante porque al ser una crisis humanitaria la que hemos tenido, debemos poner al ser humano en el centro de nuestras ocupaciones. Y la número 5, que es ESG o ASG, con todo lo referente a lo ambiental, a lo social y a la gobernanza. Es así como les agradezco nuevamente su presencia. Espero sinceramente que disfruten esta charla y les dejo los datos de contacto de Ale Villarroel, nuestra directora ejecutiva, y de Arlet Novoa, nuestra coordinadora de operaciones. Y ahora me permito presentar brevemente a John Salustri, quien va a ser nuestro moderador del panel del día de hoy. John Salustri es editor en jefe de Salustri Content Solutions, Inc., una consultora enfocada en mejorar el contenido web e impreso de clientes en todo el país. Contribuye regularmente a la estrategia de contenido de BOMA International, por lo que él y el equipo editorial recibieron el premio Apex a la excelencia. John también ha ganado 4 veces el premio a la excelencia en periodismo de la Asociación Nacional de Editores de Bienes Raíces. Muchísimas gracias, John, por estar con nosotros y te cedo los micrófonos.
So thank you so much and welcome everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here. Our conversation is an expansion of the BOMA International deep dive on the psychology of the return to the office. And you can access that feature as well as its companion video, which features by the way, two of our panelists today. You can access that by clicking on boma.org/deep dives. Our panelists, as I said today, two of them did contribute greatly to that work. And I'd like to introduce our panel of experts now. We'll do it in alphabetical order because I'm very political that way. Rafael Berriman is Managing Director of Real Estate Management Services for Colliers in Mexico City. Stephanie Birnbaum is Chief People Officer of Hines in New York City. And Susan Hammer, RPA, is Vice President and General Manager of JLL in Chicago. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for being here today. Let's start right off. According to CNN, most Mexican regions are yellow or orange in terms of their risk factor for COVID resurgence. None are red from the last I saw. Since we have panelists from neighbors to the north and to the south, let's compare the caution factor about a return to the office. And Rafael, let's start with you.
Thank you, John. Basically, at the beginning of the pandemic, all the people are starting to think about the return to the work. Return at work is a question that today is more than very important in all the companies. Certainly in Mexico, the light of the different regions change, and in my opinion, sometimes more for political reasons than the real effect of the pandemic. But for all the companies, absolutely all the people is in the process to understand what is the right way to back to work. Back at work is in many ways not only important. We need to look a lot of different elements as provide the health and safety procedures, as take care about the different behaviors and physical distancing norms. The technology is with a very important play in this process, because technology at the same time that in one way is a provider for possibilities to manage very well these things. But for example, if you take the control of a TV in your office and other people take the same control, is maybe a possibility to take the virus. The design and considerations of design, the furniture, the layout that the spaces have, in many ways are were made with different concepts than today the companies require for a different way to collaborate and to work in the space. And finally, the protocols, the navigation, communication into the office at work is completely different in the return. And in my conception, the most important thing in this moment that today the map of Mexico shows in green many of the states, but clearly for all of us, the crisis is not finished. The crisis will take many more time to end. And maybe we need to learn to live with a lot of these considerations for many, many time.
I'll
Thank
jump
you,
in.
Ross. Oh,
I'll
I'm sorry,
jump in.
please.
Yeah,
Go
jump
ahead,
in
Susan.
here a little bit about Chicago, where I live and work. And what Raphael was talking about, the political persuasions of different people and how that might affect the return to work or even the progression of the virus. And Chicago has a much different philosophy than even suburban Chicago and also downstate. So Illinois is a pretty big and long state. And there are different mandates throughout the different areas. And it's almost a parallel percentage of how the virus is doing, depending on the mandates that are in place. And I think that's pretty typical throughout the Midwest, which I'm most familiar with. There might some areas in the South also have a similar to Southern Illinois, for example. And I just think there's just a parallel sign of how the mandates are working within different regions and how the virus is doing, which therefore is affecting the return to work. And even suburban Chicago, which might have some different mandates, those people come into Chicago to work. So they have to, they're restricted because of that and may want to stay home as well until it completely passes.
Stephanie?
Yeah,
What's
I'll
your
just
sense of
jump
New
in.
York?
Well, in New York, as well as what I've observed across our global Hines footprint, is that earlier in the pandemic, yes, we watched very closely the case counts and the trends of those case counts, hospitalizations, hospital capacity, et cetera, as an indicator for how safe it might be to come into work and how to think about capacity and utilization in the workplace. But I'm really observing now that the conversation and the feeling of safety is much more driven by vaccination rates than anything else. And, you know, unless case counts are surging in a region, it's really vaccination rate that employees tend to look to primarily as a signal that this building is safe. You know, if I know that there's a vaccination or a vaccinate and test policy in place, that makes me feel safe coming to work, even if there is still, you know, growing caseload happening in the community. So, I mean, I think from a building manager's and owner's perspective, you know, we're talking about the psychology of the return. Safety, you know, how we manage safety has evolved a lot over the course of the pandemic. It's gone from temperature screening and surface cleaning and social distancing markers, I think, to the most impactful variable being vaccination and testing strategy and communication around that. That's at least what I've observed for, you know, the employees in Hines and the tenants in our buildings and what they're looking to us for as an indicator that it's safe to come to work.
All three of you touched on one aspect or another of perception, and I do want to get into that in just a minute. But just as a baseline, can each of you give me just an idea, a quick number, obviously very ballpark? What are your vacancy rates looking like now? What have you heard from the market, not just for Hines, for example, or JLL or Colliers, but generally? Are they inching back? Is occupancy inching back up?
I think what I've heard throughout the industry, and not just in Chicago, but in other areas, is that it's remained about the same for the last 7 months or so, between 15 and 20% occupancy. So, you know, so the building is 85% vacant as far as people in the building. That has been pretty consistent the last 5 or 6 months. And it's, this week we had I have a building that has over 3,200 people on a normal day. We had 800 one day this week, and that was a record. So that kind of gives you an idea of where we are. And I think until, at least in Chicago, and they're getting close to removing some of the mask mandates, and as the vaccines, as Stephanie alluded to, are increasing and more employers are requiring it of their employees, and more vendors, or the service providers are also requiring it, that's going to help to bring people back. I also think just because of the time of the year, and we're starting to get into the holidays now, at least in the United States, with Thanksgiving and then Christmas after that people are thinking, okay, we've got the holidays. Let's think about January 1st as coming back. So that's another factor too, as timing.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that, although then some of the numbers you're seeing are higher than what we're seeing in some markets. I'll give you a parallel example of a building in Lower Manhattan, where on a typical pre-pandemic day, we'd have 6,000 tenant employees coming in, and we've only hit 500 in a day twice. And one of them was last week. But especially in Lower Manhattan, I think we're seeing even lower numbers than what you're seeing, Susan, in Chicago. I thought it was interesting that we have a few, in Manhattan, there are a few financial services organizations who've been very public, that their CEOs taking a very, severe stance around everyone must come back to the office. But anecdotally, even in those offices, we're not seeing full compliance. So even with a CEO mandate to come back to work, there are a lot of employees that still don't come back to work. So employees have a lot of agency and power in this situation. And I think what we're seeing is that as time goes on, it becomes harder and harder to, quote, force people back, right? Just telling them they have to come back isn't going to be enough. So I think that puts impetus on all of us to think about the experience that people have when they come to work at a building, and how can we make that experience something that is additive or better than what the experience is that they can have sitting alone at home all day on Zoom.
Yeah, and I just trying to build on what Stephanie was saying. We used to have a work-life balance, and now it's a work-life integration of people are home with their children, and children are still a big part of the coming back to work. I think if you have small children at home, or and if you were Zooming, you might be able to take them to school or to the doctor or to a play date, or other things that you go to their sports games where you wouldn't be as flexible with that before. So I think employers need to really work at how they're going to integrate the past lifestyle, the past 18 months to make as an incentive for their employees to come back to work, because there's a lot of factors that are playing into that.
Yes, the numbers in Mexico are not very, very different. In the buildings that we are managing, maybe the percentage is between 15 or 20% in the higher cases. We are seeing in the last days a little increase. For example, in our office, we decide to back at work 2 weeks ago, and we are 3 times more today than 1 month ago. But in my opinion, the new normal is absolutely not normal, but the new normal, as many think is talking, is in a model completely different. Maybe a hybrid model. In that model, the people will work some days in home, some days in the office, and the experiment proved that it works perfectly. Many people was working at home, in some cases with more productivity, and with a deep commitment to not stop the continuity of the business. And I think is the most important thing to keep in mind, the continuity in the business operation. And the big experiment was successful in many cases. In our case, it proved that the people could manage very well a very high % of the work at home.
And they're all adults too, let's face it. This whole switch to work-life integration says it in my head that the work part of it is winning, because you can walk the dog and take the kids to school, like you said, Susan, but at the same time, the tendency is you're never disconnected. You always have your laptop, and we never were anyway, but now we're working from home, and that's becoming, like you said, Raphael, the new normal, which brings up the perception of safety at work. What constitutes that perception, and what's the message on the part of building management that says, okay, you're comfortable at home, but look what you have here, plus we're safe. How do you handle that messaging for a timid tenancy?
We take care for many details that provide a message to feel safety in the building, starting with in the entrance, a machine take to your body temperature. Then you have gel to sanitize your hands in every corner in the building, in every corner in the office. And we made a special sign out into the office to provide clear message for the people. And in fact, we sanitize the office to provide a very, very healthy space. In the case of Mexico, I am worried about to the transportation to the office, because the people is very safe in the office. But if the people need to take a public transportation and then need to change for another public transportation and then walk in a space that is not very, very clean, well, obviously could arrive to a very clean space, but the translation between home and office is a fact that is not easy to take, in many cases, easy for all of us.
And I think, you know, Raphael, that one of the things that we think about is the building commute worthy. So are you going to get on public transportation to, is to get to your building? And, I think the other aspect of that, and one way to help with that, is your communication. So you're doing all these things and you just do it normally, and you're probably doing a lot of things anyway. I know, Elsa, in your introduction, you talked about BOMA 360 and the Toby Awards, and everything that goes into those have a perception of, whether it's sustainability, environmental, and the wellness factor, and everything else that you're doing for your buildings, that you should communicate that. And yes, you may be doing it, but if you're not telling people that you're doing it, then they're not going to know. And you're building up your trust with your tenants because you're communicating the right thing to them about how healthy the building is, and that you're concerned with the human factor of the building rather than just the physical factors.
Yes, the employee health and well-being should be in the top of mind of the companies, because at the end, the continuity of the business depends on that.
Yes, and I couldn't agree more with the comments around the importance of communicating clearly and making sure people understand. Maybe it's even in a branded form, of your building's safety promise to its tenants, right? A branded way of, here's all the things we do around safety. The complication that can come up, which I think does pose some challenges to get ahead of for operators is, let's say we make a safety promise, we communicate it, we put it out there, employees expect that, they make their commute. But then if they arrive and they observe those protocols not being followed, so for example, if masking is part of the protocol, but they observe people not wearing masks and there's no consequence, nothing happens, then that can just erode the whole promise of safety and the whole communication of safety in a second when someone observes, that there's no consequence for not doing it. That puts building operators in a really tough spot of enforcement. And I think there's a real debate, a real question, there's not one clear answer about what should be building staff's role in enforcing these safety protocols. Very sadly, in the US and in other parts of the world, we've seen arguments about masking protocols become very heated. And I know at Heinz, we want to protect our employees from any kind of escalation of potential conflict, right, with people who don't want to follow protocols. But at the same time, if we have the protocols and we're not holding people to them, then what do the protocols even mean? So I think it's a very, that's a very complicated thing for us, for us all to continue talking about and try to solve.
There's a flip side conversation to that too. There are the protocols that a wise building management will have in place. And there are the things that tenants might expect, which I'm going to skip down a little bit because it brings up the topic of, I love the phrase, hygiene theater. The stuff that might not really have practical value, but tenants want to see just because it makes them feel better. They want to see people cleaning all the time, even if there's nothing transmittable on that surface. How do you deal with the balance between hygiene theater and science? Stephanie, I see you nodding.
Sure, I'm happy to jump in. I have mixed feelings about the term hygiene theater. I understand its meaning and how it's being used. I think the reality of the pandemic is that we have been learning as we go about which hygiene related or safety related activities really matter. At the beginning of the pandemic, there was science to suggest that the virus could transmit on surfaces and that surface cleaning needed to be a high priority. Now, as we learned more about the virus and as time went on, we found that that's actually not the case. The chances of the virus spreading via surfaces are extremely low. So that's, and so to me, that's more about us testing and learning as we go, having a learning mindset with how we approach handling safety as more information becomes available, rather than, I prefer not to take a cynical view of something that we now realize is kind of, outdated or less effective than we first thought it was, because we're learning as we go. And so I think that if there's a tenant that is asking for something, like temperature check is one that falls into this category for us at Heinz. If we have a tenant who's saying, I really feel strongly about temperature check because it makes people feel safe, we'd try to really get into a dialogue and a discussion about how ineffective, and use data to show how ineffective we've observed temperature check to be in actually keeping people safe. Now, at the beginning of the pandemic, we thought otherwise based on the information we had, and there's no theater behind that. There was no intention to perform behind that. There was simply a belief that what was effective in the moment based on the limited information that we have. So I prefer to take a lens of continuous learning on this, and using data to talk about what we know and what we don't know at any given point.
And I think also, communicating the things that they can't see that are really doing the thing, whether it's air filtration, bringing more fresh air in, moving the air around more, doing air testing and all the other things that they might not be able to see, but communicating that. And these are best practices anyway for a lot of buildings that might be LEED or WELL or FitWell or other certifications that they might have. So if they need to know those things are happening, and that, as you said, Stephanie, that continuously cleaning the elevator buttons may not be as effective as the other things that we're doing.
Yes, the psychological message is very important. But wear a mask and the social distancing is very effective, because even you are with the vaccine, you could be provide a virus for other people. But the complete management of the thing is important to the people could feel totally comfortable.
One of our speakers in the deep dive that I referenced before, the one that Stephanie and Susan were so great helping us with, and it wasn't Stephanie or Susan, but someone else, one of the other experts, indicated that it was a question about how much things were changing almost weekly at the start of the pandemic. But I asked her about this, and she said, you have to remember that science isn't linear. We're always learning something new. And I think that's still the case. We can't, the politicization of what comes out of, in the US, the CDC, is one thing. The other thing is, the new discoveries that they're making and how that informs and changes the life of the property manager. Raphael, you had mentioned up front, redistribution of furniture, for social distancing and all that good stuff. What are your offices looking like now? Is it all plexiglass and half of the desks removed? How have you, or how have your tenants reshaped their spaces for safety's sake?
Some companies are taking now a different layout, and some people is thinking in a new way to use the furniture, use the different spaces. But in fact, in 90% of the cases, the office is the same, but with less chairs open for the people. And today, in the more of the cases, I am seeing people taking the social distance and the meeting rooms with less people, with not a huge problem, because again, it's not too much the people assisting to the office. The people that today is working at work and not at home is not the 100%. Today, the percentage is lower, and then it's easy to manage the space. But in the near future, I am absolutely sure the companies should think in a new layouts, in a new way to use the spaces, because the office will be more a collaborative space. not only a space to make a video conference as today, but not only an office to receive and answer your email, because the office will be more and more a space to create value for the opportunity to join together again and understand the collaborative side of the business.
Yes, I agree. I mean, that's what we're seeing too, is the majority of space reconfiguration is not about, it's not about distancing, and it's not about plexiglass or safety or barriers or anything. It's about collaboration, as Rafael was saying. It's about using the space not to just come to an office to do exactly the same thing you would have done at home, put your head down and work alone, come to an office to do something that you couldn't do from home, sit collaboratively with other people and have a brainstorming and active session together. It's also about sharing space and multi-use space. So we're seeing a big focus on, not just single-use private offices, but how can you reconfigure those private offices so that they could function one day as someone's individual office and another day as a huddle meeting room, or a hybrid meeting room. Because to your point, Rafael, very few people are coming in 5 days a week, yet we're paying for the real estate each day. So let's make it do double duty and meet multiple uses if we don't want a sea of desks that are going to be vacant half of the time.
Yeah, and that's, bringing it back to more the human factor, the collaborative factor, which also enhances the business factors as well, as that you want to accommodate all of the space that you can collaborate in, but also, more focusing on the health of the workers and making sure they have windows and natural light and other things that's going, again, incentivize them to come back to the office. And I think that's what all of us as building operators want. We want everyone to come back. We want our tenants to have full offices. But we also want to be able to help them as much as we can to do that. And I think with vaccine mandates, and a lot of companies are requiring that their employees are vaccinated, that more people will come back, whether it's 5 days a week, maybe not right away, but at least 2 or 3 or 4 days a week.
I agree. And, building on that, it looks like we got a question in the chat of what do you think is going to happen with breastfeeding, common pantry, and kitchens? And I would say, building off what Susan said, when employees feel like there is a high enough vaccination rate, or when the employer has made vaccination or regular testing a requirement, that's when I see more open and free use of those sorts of amenities, of meals in the office. And that was the pattern that we followed within Hines, is that, before we were at a vaccinate or test policy, meals were very limited, or they were outside, we're still masking in the office heavily. But once everyone in the office has been either vaccinated or tested weekly, we're back to, having group lunches, bringing in lunch 3 days a week, all of those things that we did before the pandemic. So I agree with Susan that vaccination is one of the major variables here.
I agree with that. Absolutely.
Thank you. Yes, I am unmuted. Good. Let's continue with that thought for just a second. We brought up collaboration, certainly the social aspect. Work from home is great for the heads down stuff. I've even heard of some organizations that are pinpointing certain employees who must be in the office and those who may just stay home. What are you seeing in terms of that push-pull between just having business continuity, which you can do from work from home, which you guys indicated, and having that continuation of culture and collaboration, the small productivity, getting the daily work done, and the large productivity, maintaining strategy and having your firm move forward? And to what extent are you starting to see, two-part question, and what extent are you starting to see hybrid work models come into your tenancies?
Well, we found a relationship between the new use for the office and the certainty to use a good space with understand the right way to find the sense to use the office. Again, the collaboration thing. And we found a relationship between the sustainability in the office with the healthy and safe procedures. For example, the use of sustainability cleaning products, sustainable cleaning products is a fact to have a better space, a better environment. The filters, for example, good filters create a better space. And we found the relationship to the certification in terms of sustainability of the office with improve the result in the office as a good space. For many clients, we are working in that with a very successful results.
I think a lot of our tenants are working out a hybrid model right now, and a lot of them were hybrid because they all consider themselves essential, so they never really stopped coming in, several of the tenants. But as Stephanie alluded to at the very beginning of this, that the workers have the leverage right now. And there are labor shortages all over in every single industry there is, from the housekeeping and security, on up to, executive levels in certain industries. So I think for the short term anyway, that the hybrid model is going to be the most successful to get tenants or get the employees back into the office, while also satisfying a CEO's need to advance the business and to grow it with a full staff. Don't know what that time frame is yet, but at least in the short term, I think that will hold.
Time frame was going to be my next question to you, Susan.
I agree with that, but I think position by position is different, because for some people it's easy to arrive in a hybrid model for some positions, but for others, because the sense of the job is not easy. For many people in my team, the work at home was possible before the pandemic, but for other people that depends of elements in the office is not easy to play exactly at the same level at work as at home. In many cases, because at home is not easy to concentrations, for example, for some people that need concentration in the job, because the children, because the dog, because the environment, and the opposite is absolutely possible. In my opinion, position by position is different, the doses of this possibility of a hybrid model.
We should, reiterate for our audience that we do have functionality for questions, as Stephanie had pointed out before. We do have another one, this one from Pablo, who, it's interesting, I understand you are pro-vaccination. What about the anti-vaxxers? Do we need to fire them, or will they just stay at home?
Not my personal opinion.
Yeah, let's do that.
Well, I do know, well, I think everyone should be vaccinated if they possibly can. And I think that when the children get vaccinated, and that's going to be a game changer for everybody, for the parents, and they'll be more able to come back, I think, to the workforce, for the schools. And it will be incredible when that happens. But there are a lot of companies who are not tolerating not being vaccinated. And they have given them deadlines to get vaccinated, or they will be terminated. And I think you're going to see that more and more as time goes on, as companies get the courage to have those mandates.
I am a promoter of the vaccination. Absolutely, because my daughter is engineer in biotechnology. Understand perfectly what is the process of this. And imagine for 1 second, when you are infected, you have millions of virus in your bodies. If you multiply that for millions of people infected, the possibilities of a mutation is extraordinarily high. Then if we don't stop that, this problem never ends, because a new mutation, a new different virus arrive, and this will be as influenced forever. Then we need to stop that, and the only way to stop is vaccination.
I am, as I'm sure you can tell, very pro-vaccine as well. If I take just a purely, clinical view, like objective view, though, it is the case that a small minority of our employees, at least, are very, very against it. And no argument is going to change their minds. And it is not only unvaccinated people. There are some vaccinated people who believe very strongly that it is not the company's role to dictate whether they should get the vaccine or not, right? So there are people, and there are, while again, for us, it is a small minority of our business, but it's a vocal minority, and it's an impassioned minority, and it's a severe topic. And one of the last things we want right now is division and bad feeling within our workforce. We want to be emerging from the pandemic. We want to be building back. We want to be strengthening relationships and culture. So this is something in my role as leading human resources globally, this is something I've spent a lot of time on and had a lot of tough conversations with people who have very, very strong feelings. And so the course of action that felt right for us, given our situation, was to strongly encourage vaccination, but require a regular testing option for employees that either couldn't get vaccinated, of which there are some, or choose not to, so that there's flexibility in there. While we do take a vocal stance about strongly encouraging vaccination, allowing that testing option too is one way to walk a slightly more middle ground, rather than firing all of the anti-vaxxers. Now, I will say there are even employees out there who will reject even that premise, even the premise of vaccinate or test. There are employees who will reject that, and that's where we have taken a stand to say, I'm sorry, we respect that you don't believe in that, but that is something where we absolutely draw the line to keep our tenants safe, to keep our employees.
Stephanie, does your company pay for the testing?
We do currently.
Okay.
Which brings up an interesting question from Carlos. And I frankly, I should know this, but I don't. Is it legal to fire someone in the USA because they're not vaccinated?
Yes.
Yes. Okay,
Is it different for
companies can-
public? I'm sorry, Susan.
Private companies can choose how they run their business and who they hire and fire.
Public companies?
Well, there are federal and state laws governing the policies for, government employees.
Mhm.
So the federal government in the US requires vaccination or termination, but some states, such as the state of Texas, prevents any state agency or employees taking that kind of stance. So it can be different state to state.
And there are, like, the General Services Administration is requiring anyone that goes into their space to be vaccinated, and they are even discussing lease amendments to assure that that happens, since there's really nothing in leases now that can make owners and managers conform to that.
Right. Danica, if you could help out with the translation, we have a couple of comments from Louis. And if you could jump in, that'd be appreciated.
I believe
Yes,
it was,
the comment of Luis talking about what type of equipment of measure to take the quality of the air in the office. And if we know if some companies are installing that type of equipment of measure for the quality of the air.
So was the question what type of equipment is used to test the quality of the air?
Correct.
Okay, I know that there are sensors that you could install throughout spaces that will automatically test the air and give results. There are handheld units which we use that you can go around to different places in the offices on try to reach every corner of every office of every floor at least once a month and to test the air. So there's all types of technology out there to assist with the testing, air testing.
Yes, the point of Luis is if the people could see the result of this equipment to feel more confident about.
They do. They see the engineers testing the spaces, and they know through that communication that I talked about that we're doing this regularly. No one has asked for the results yet, specific results, but we do tell them that everything is within normal ranges.
Maybe it's a good idea to provide for the people the result. Better if it's a good result.
Yeah, I think, some owners are concerned about whether there'll be some judgments involved with the results. So they are careful about that, but still communicating some general overall results.
We have a little time left. We do have one question from Andrina. If you can translate, Rafael or Danica.
The actions that we recommend to provide the security feeling for the occupants of the office.
Can you repeat that,
actions
Rafael?
We recommend.
I'm sorry,
What
could you?
actions we recommend to provide for the people more feeling of security?
So it's more of a statement than a question.
No, I think what he means is the safety feeling of the occupants.
Anybody?
Well, I think if as long as you are performing, at least in America, the way that the CDC recommends that you do things, that's one thing that you can say. And they can look on the CDC's website and see that what the protocols are. I think if the building staff is performing exactly the same way that we are asking tenants to do, where there's wearing masks and being distancing, and you will communicate the other things that you're doing on a continuous basis, because it is evolving. And what you're doing today, you may have to change it tomorrow. And just gaining confidence of your tenants that you are recognizing these different aspects, recognizing the science, recognizing the technology, recognizing the operational protocols that you need to do to make the tenant safe. And I always like to tell tenants that I am in this building also, or I'm in this space as well. I'm not going to do anything that's going to harm my own health. So you can be assured that you are safe in the space, and that we're doing everything we can to make sure everybody remains healthy.
I agree with Susan, but I think if you show more the decisions about to use the right materials, to the decisions to provide more information for the frequent cleaning to the space, to provide the hand sanitizer, the institutional signing in the building about these things, the change of paths to travel in the big building. In many cases, we changed that to provide a more easy way to keep the distance between the people. And well, in the way that you show more about, the people will feeling more certainty about.
One specific thing. Oh,
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well,
Please.
one thing that we haven't talked about yet that is an action that a building could take is setting up a on-site testing center, which many of our tenants have done. I know that's not possible in all situations, that you need the right kind of scale to do it, but test availability, goes in cycles. And there'll be long cycles where they're fully available and it's not that important of an amenity. But when the tests become unavailable, which happens on and off, right, every couple months, it is a very important amenity to people. And if people know that there's a testing site downstairs, people are able to or encouraged to get regularly tested, I think that's another action. Of course, it costs money, but that's another action that a building could take to increase the feeling of safety for people.
I agree with that. I think some companies are setting up virtual health clinics so that the tenants can go online and ask questions about their own health, as well as, where do I get a test, and other things like that. That just another amenity and a concern, show that you are concerned about the health of the individuals in the building.
I want to turn it over to Elsa for the wrap up, but not before I thank Susan, Stephanie, and Raphael. It's been a pleasure working with all three of you, and I want to thank our hosts, BOMA Mexico, for your cordiality and your time. Thank you, Elsa.
Muchísimas gracias a todos. Ha sido una charla excelente. Creo que hemos encontrado con mucha información relevante, y por mi parte me gustaría saber si ustedes tienen algún comentario sobre una pregunta que nos hizo una persona del público referente a trabajar en este mundo híbrido y las diferentes generaciones. ¿Cómo una persona de 20 años puede coexistir con una persona de 40 y una de 60, por poner estos niveles de edades, ¿verdad? Porque es muy importante. Yo creo que si cerramos con esta, digamos, conclusión de parte de ustedes, creo que habremos hecho un excelente trabajo en este webinar. Y les agradezco nuevamente su atención. No sé quién quiera comenzar, pero les cedo los micrófonos.
For me, it's a pleasure to share with you, all of you, and thank you very much. And I think the hybrid model at the end is maybe the most possible way to solve our near future. And I think it's not a problem related with you. What are you? In my opinion, is more related with what is the infrastructure that we will create in this process, the infrastructure at home and the infrastructure at the office. And again, is different position by position. It's not a problem related with the age of the people. Many people very old as me is open to work with that, and young people is open too. And the cases, and I think are the less that reject this kind of thing in the new life will be exist always. Always somebody is against the things.
Yeah, I think you need all generations. If you're going to collaborate, you're not going to be able to get all the perspectives that you need. So, you know, every generation should be open to working with others. In my case, with younger generations.
I agree. And I think that, you know, we are in an industry that for many, many years didn't really change that much. We are going through a profound time of change and innovation in our industry. And I, for one, feel very lucky to be in our industry at this point of time. I think all of us together are in such a great moment where we can really rethink things in bold ways. So it's an honor to be able to, have been a part of this conversation with you all to talk about ideas for how we might be able to do that. But I agree. It's going to take a lot of conversation. It's going to take a lot of dialogue and back and forth and idea sharing for us to get it right. So I'm grateful for sessions like this, and we can come together and do that.
Exactamente. John, ¿algún comentario final de tu parte?
I agree with everything that was said in terms of the cross-generational aspect. There's also a great push within BOMA, as you all know, for diversity, equity, and inclusion, and all of that brings fresh ideas to the fold, brings it all to the table. Thank you all. That's all I had. This is a real pleasure. Greatly appreciated from all of you, by all of you. Thank you.
Gracias, que estén muy bien.
Gracias. Thank you.